Hi, today we are back with Sam again, my wonderful demonstration horse, and we are going to try and show you a lot of these exercises that you've seen in the previous DVDs that you can work on by yourself. Because a lot of the times we don't have always the advantage of having another person in the arena or having a lunging horse available or having someone to lunge you. So the exercises that you've learned in the previous DVDs, I'm going to try and put together for you a little self-lunging video so that when you get on your horse, like this is my first horse of the day, so I'm going to be working on loosening and balancing my own position and going through some of the exercises you've seen previously. One of the things that we need to talk about before we get started is your safety. Never put yourself in jeopardy when you're working on your own position or your relaxation or your horses. So you need to choose a horse that's going to be comfortable with you moving your body around maybe a little bit out of normal position. For example, you should not be on a horse that might mind you moving your extremities in places that would spook him. So if you're on a spooky horse and it's going to bother him and he'll scoot out from underneath you, then it's not the right horse to practice this on. Aside from the arms moving, we also have to be able to be comfortable that you can drop your stirrups and move your legs around and it's not going to bother the horse. So with your safety issues, this first priority for you when you're picking the horse that you're going to be practicing these things on. So I'm going to walk a little circle and come broadside to you, and then we're going to talk about how to get started. As you know from the other DVDs, the first place that we should always start to look at when we're talking about your position is your center, your seat and your center. So when we're talking about our seat and our center, we're talking about everything from just above the knee right up to the hip and the waist. Everything that adheres to the saddle is part of your center and your seat. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is whether we are centered laterally and longitudinally over the horse. Longitudinal from tail to poll and laterally from side to side. And when I'm thinking about whether I'm in the middle of my horse, I'm going to think of that buzzword target or bullseye. So you can see if I'm sitting here in this position, I'm going to think target and bullseye and put myself vertically over the horse. So I'm going to walk along and I'm going to be thinking about that from both lateral channeling over the horse and longitudinal channeling over the horse. So this is my warm-up time too. My body's stiff. It's the first horse I've been on today, so I'm going to be thinking about whether or not I'm off to one side or ahead of my horse. So I'm going to be thinking about whether my feet are underneath my hip and whether my shoulders are over my hips and whether my head is balanced over the rest of my body. So when we think about when you don't have someone to watch you, how do we know whether or not we are centered over our target? We're going to keep those buzzwords in mind of how to do that. Maybe you'll be able to see, if I'm facing the camera, one of my buzzwords to help me think about the target and bullseye is zipper. And we will think about your zipper coming straight down from your chest and your chin all the way to the pommel. So if I feel like I'm this way on the horse and I say to myself, zipper, I close my seat down and I center it over the bullseye and over the target, and I align my zipper down to the ground. Okay, so zipper is going to be one of my big ones because I tend to want to sit off to the left a little bit. Alright, so as we're figuring out whether we are centered over the saddle, I'm going to take my stirrups away and I'm just going to walk. And first, before I do anything, I'm just making sure that Sam doesn't mind that my legs are hanging down. And we're going to go over some of those exercises in bullseye organization to make sure that you're really sitting in the center. So as I come around, I'm going to do one of my exercises, frog legs, where I take my leg away and then I drop my leg down. And I should be able to feel both of my seat bones at that time very equally. If I can't, I'm going to use the buzzword frog legs. I'm going to think about how that feels when I take my leg off the horse and keep my seat bones equal in the saddle. Another buzzword that we've talked about is Nordic track. All right, so I kind of think of the Nordic track of moving my legs back and forth. This mobilizes my hips and also really shows me whether or not I can feel both of my seat bones equally. Maybe you can see it or not, but at the moment I can feel that I have more weight on my left seat bone than on my right seat bone. So I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to try and feel both my seat bones equally together. So Nordic track, or maybe even scissors, whatever comes to your mind, to be able to move your legs independently, like maybe on a bicycle, whatever buzzword you want to use to help you think about moving your legs independently so that your hips stay loose in the saddle. All right, so now I feel like I'm pretty level with both of my seat bones. So there's another good word for me to think about, is a level across my hips, the carpenter's level, with the bubble being right a little bit below my belly button, of whether or not I'm keeping my pelvis and my hip bones, and my hip bones, I can find them if I put my hand on my waist, right where my fingers would be where I'm trying to gauge through the back here of whether my seat is level in the saddle, whether my hip and my pelvis is tipped to one side. So I'm going to pick my stirrups back up and see whether I still feel level. So if I'm not, if I feel like I'm dropping my right hip, which is what I usually do, I'm going to think level and open my pelvis so that I have that carpenter's level with the bubble right in the middle of my belly button is perfectly centered. Okay, so that's feeling more equal to me now. Now I'm going to talk about the pelvis a little bit more since we're there. And we've talked about 3 positions of the pelvis. We've talked about a pelvis that's too closed, which is tipped forward. We've talked about neutral, which is the pelvis directly open and underneath your center of your body. And we've talked about the pelvis being too open and rolled like roach back. Okay, I personally tend to sit with a little bit too tipped a pelvis. So the buzzword that I'm going to use to help me remember not to be too forward with a closed pelvis is bucket, and I'll explain that again. So if I have a bucket of water that I'm holding in between my pelvis and I am tipped too far forward, I would let the water spill out the front of the bucket. When I'm in neutral, I'm holding the water directly underneath me and nothing is spilling out front or back. If I'm too rolled and I've got my pelvis too open and I have a roach back, the water is spilling out the back of the bucket like this. So you might have to think of an extreme, like if you're a rider that wants to be like this with your pelvis too far forward, then you might think about water spilling out the back of the bucket to get yourself organized and stay in neutral. Alright, so there we have the pelvis, so I'll be using that word for myself, water out the back, so that I'm sure I'm not tipped too far forward. Now, the C, as I said, comes all the way down to your knee. And the adhesion of your seat and the whole soft thigh, both seat bones and your pubic bone, creates the contact with the saddle. If we have our thighs in a position that's too far forward or pulled up and the angle of the knee is coming forward, then we don't have the length of the thigh that we need. So I'm going to use that buzzword gardening knees to make sure that my kneecap is pointed straight down to the ground and that the length of my thigh is as long as possible. So if I'm feeling like my knee is pulled up and my heels are up, I'm going to think about the gardening knee. And the way that we practiced that before was to just bend the knee too far back and then relax it down and think about lengthening and opening the hip so that the thigh stretches all the way down to the ground. So if I feel like I'm starting to grip with my thighs and pinch with my knee, I'm going to say gardening knees. Okay, so keeping with the theme of the center until we've really gone through whether I'm in balance or not, we've got that buzzword sleepwalk. Okay, so sometimes you're going to think about where your body is aligned. Are you too far behind the vertical? If you're too far behind the vertical, where a lot of riders put themselves in sort of a defensive position, then I'm going to think of that word sleepwalk, and I'm pressing my hands up and forward until I'm all the way up to the vertical. All right, so if I feel myself getting back too far, I can actually take one hand, push it forward as if I'm looking for the wall in the dark when I'm going into sleepwalk. Okay, so now I'm thinking that I'm nearly vertical, and I really now want to also make sure that my seat and my core and the line of my zipper is aligning on the circle or the path that I've chosen. So if I am, say, turned too far to the outside of the circle like this, then both of my hips and shoulders are looking to the outside. I want to make sure that not only is my horse's chest aligned and his body and spine is aligned on the circle, but that my own center and chest and hips are aligned on the circle. So I'm going to think like I have two laser beams that come from my hip bone forward that follows the line of my circle. So remember to find your hip. You put your hand on your waist, and just about where your middle finger lies is your point of hip, and you want to make sure that those are pointed on your circle, not too far to the inside, not too far to the outside, just following the line. So I'm going to think that I might have a couple of sets of laser beams. I might have my laser beams on my hip traveling forward on the circle, my knees might have a laser beam traveling forward on the circle, and my shoulders might have a laser beam coming out on the circle, so that all of my lights from my laser beams are following one path. Okay, so we're going to work a little bit now on traveling down the leg so that we can continue to have independent seat, leg, and hand. And I'm going to talk about the mobilization of my knee and my lower leg compared to my thigh. So one of the exercises that you want to be able to do is to be able to move your lower leg too far back or too far forward, because if you can't move it to one extreme or the other, then you will have a difficult time finding the right place. So the buzzword that we've used in the past for determining how much to open or close your lower leg is folding ruler. So if I have my leg bent back, then I have this angle is much more closed and my ruler is closed. So if you're a rider that has your legs too far back like this, then you're going to think about opening the ruler so that your angle between your thigh and your calf is more open. If you're a rider that likes to force the heels down and open the lower leg too much, then you have to think about closing the ruler. So you want to be able to go from one extreme to the other. So as we're traveling down the leg a little farther, I'm going to go to my ankle. Okay, my left ankle particularly is always have a little more trouble being flexible. So the I'm going to do to check my ankles, and I'll do one at a time, is to drop my foot out of the stirrup, and I'm going to do an ankle roll. I'm going to do really slow, big, pointed down to the ground all the way up that I can do. So a lot of people think that heels down is just about the foot, but it's actually quite related to the flexibility of your calf. So if I can't roll my toe in a big circle, and you can do it in both directions, in and then out, and then really make that whole calf and ankle feel flexible, because our buzzword for our flexible ankles is springboard. Because as the horse is trotting and cantering, You want to be able to have these joints of your lower leg and your knee to take up the movement of the horse's body, of the horse's movement. So our springboard ankles, whether or not we're flexible in the back of the calf and Achilles tendon area, will be very helpful for you doing all these exercises like sitting the trot. So again, we're just going to have a couple of ankle rolls. And then when I place my foot back in the stirrup, we think about springboard heels. Okay, my left foot is always my stiff one, as I said, and it generally hangs in a place where the toe is directly underneath my knee. But a lot of times I might find myself turning my toes out. Okay, I see a lot of this, especially with riders that are trying to convert maybe from jumping or eventing to dressage, where we have to have a very relaxed contact with the whole body of the horse. So you don't want to feel like your toe is sticking out away from your horse, because that puts the back of your calf on the horse. We want to really be able to allow our leg to hang down and drop down and have the toe basically in parallel line with the knee. So what I'm going to think about, if I feel my lower leg coming out and tipping out with the toe and then I grip with the back of my thigh, I'm going to think skis, like if I was doing cross-country skiing and if I turned my toe out, the back of my skis would cross and I'd probably fall down. So I want to keep my toe straight and parallel and relaxed and forward along the line of my circle, not out and not in. So we're just going to let it drop down, and I'll think of skis to keep my lower leg relaxed and parallel to the horse. So then that leads me to, how do I place my foot in the stirrup? So what I see a lot of times is that when a rider has the toe too far out, then you feel that as if you have a lot more pressure on the ball of your foot than on the toe of your foot. So I just want to use the word that we used, I think with Sheila on her sitting trot, and that was how to place your foot in the stirrup. I want you to pretend that you're just setting your foot down onto the stirrup bar like you're setting your foot into a slipper. The distribution of the weight of your body, which should not be a lot in your stirrups, should be equal across your stirrup bar. If you feel that you have more pressure like this on your big toe, then the balance of your body is pressing outward. If you feel like the pressure of your legs is more on your little toe, then you can see when I do that, it takes my leg too far away and pulls my heel in too much. So we want to have the distribution of the weight onto the stirrup, just like you're placing your foot in that slipper. And I guess that would be sort of a combination if I'm placing my foot in the slipper of my skis, so that I'm just very relaxed. I'm not pressing myself down too much. The heel can just be just barely below the stirrup bar. If you're pressing them too far forward, we've seen that in the other videos, then it pushes your leg forward and pushes your seat to the back of the saddle. So we're going to take a little break here while I reorganize, and then we'll go on from there. So now we've just finished the center and the seat of your body, and we've gone down to the lower limbs. Now we're going to travel back up to the seat and the center again, and then do the upper body for extremities. So I've just changed direction because good Sam here, he's been working with me to the right for a while. Now we're going to go to the left. So I'm going to think about returning to my seat, checking my target, checking my bullseye, making sure that I feel like I'm reaching for the sky and that I'm tall through my abdomen without changing my lateral or my longitudinal center over my horse. And if I feel comfortable with that, and I'm not too far forward or I'm not too far back, and I've really thought about making myself directly over the center of Sam, then I'm going to move on to my upper body. So I personally like to let my left waist collapse and my right shoulder forward, which I'm going to exaggerate for you a little bit like this. And I can't tell you how many people have the same problem that I do, especially when we go left, because our horses tend to be more hollow to the left side. So we like to sometimes compensate for them, which we should not be doing. If we want to own the horse's position, we need to own our own position. So if I'm thinking about the feeling in my ribs right now, I definitely can feel that I'm more closed on my left side and my right shoulder is forward. So I'm going to give you some of those buzzwords and myself some of those buzzwords to help me think about my ribs and my hip and my shoulders so that I'm still very aligned in my channel. So the old toothpick, where if I have the toothpick on my hip, if I'm collapsing my rib cage and I think I don't want to stick my ribs with the toothpick, I'm going to lift that side of my rib cage up. So I'm going to say that a lot to myself, toothpick, where I open up. Some of my students also like the word slinky, so that if I'm collapsed and I have my rings of my slinky closed, I can say to myself slinky and stretch up, so that I stretch those rings of the slinky around so that they're spread apart as much as possible, but without thinking of tipping forward or back. So I'm lifting the rings parallel to each other away from my hips. So I'm thinking slinky as I lift my sternum. That's going to be my buzzword. So I've got toothpicks and I've got slinky. Now that leads me to think right now I'm really working at lifting my sternum by thinking of this slinky, but I feel a little stiff. So I'm going to imagine that my spine is a feather, so that the center of my spine is like the bone of the feather, and then my ribs are just the little hairs of the feather. So even though I'm still lifting up my rib cage and I'm thinking toothpick or slinky, I'm also thinking of taking a deep breath and relaxing so that my body and my spine is like a feather. Okay, so then we're going to think about the level again. We're going to think about the level at my hips, and we're going to think about the level at my shoulders, and we're going to think about the level at my head. We're not quite up to the head yet, but the level could be applied to my ears, my shoulders, or my hips. So I'm going to start with the shoulders since we've already gone over the hips. And as I said, my own left shoulder likes to be down and my right shoulder likes to be forward. So how I'm going to check to see whether or not my shoulders are level, and maybe if they're not, I'm going to be able to mobilize it, is just to do a couple of shoulder reaches. So with my right shoulder too far forward and closed here, I'm going to take my right hand back all the way to the tail as much as possible. So I'm opening and I'm reaching. I'm also trying to make sure that my leg doesn't swing as I do it, because I want to really make sure that my seat stays parallel. It's just a shoulder reach. So I'm going to just reach back a couple of times, get my shoulder relaxed and stretching. And then if I think about the word shoulder the next time I come around, I might not move my hand, but I'm going to think about reaching back with my shoulder, and I'm not going to move my hand, but I'm going to emulate that same feeling of how it felt to do this. I'm going to think my shoulder to open it up. Okay, so then you could do that with either arm. My own personal problem is my right shoulder, but you can do it with the left shoulder, especially if you're a rider who forgets to turn your spine and your body on the line that you're on. So your inside shoulder should be looking around at your circle line or your serpentine line. So you can just practice doing that and then think shoulder. Sam. Okay, so now we've talked about the shoulders. I'm still not feeling like my shoulders are quite relaxed enough. So if you remember the buzzword wings, our wings is when we're going to think about having the wings attached to the shoulder blade and open the scapulas up as if I was opening my wings all the way back. Now if you find that hard, you might have some tension back in the back of your neck or shoulder, so you can do some shoulder rolls where I think bring my shoulders up to my ears, roll them all the way back, and then drop my shoulder blades behind my ribs. So I actually felt some little crackling going on there. That felt good. So while I'm walking, rolling my shoulders back, and then when I think about my wings, I'm really going to think of really opening up. So if you're a rider who has a lot of tension in the top of your shoulder and neck, which is really common, I mean, you could be sitting at your desk all day typing and getting very stiff, just do some rolling forward and back, sort of like your washing machine exercise. Now, when we did that on the lunge line, we used 2 hands and we brought our arms and shoulders around, but you're not going to drop both reins to do that. You could do it independently, or you could just think about rolling your shoulders, and again, your seat and your lower leg is not going to change when you think about rolling your shoulders. So take a deep breath, and wings. Now I feel looser now, so I can open and drop my arms down by my side. Okay, so now we're going to continue up the upper body. And another example of stretching up that you can use is reach for the sky. So if you're not sure of whether or not you're stretching yourself opposing gravity, take one hand and reach for the sky and feel how it lifts your sternum and how it lifts and separates your rib cage. And you can do that with both arms and reach for the sky. If you're on the lunge line and you have a great horse, you can do this with both hands. But if you're just practicing like I am of getting myself loose and centered, you can just do it with one hand. Reach for the sky. So then I try to stay vertical over my horse as I reach for the sky. Wings. That's better. I'm feeling like I'm dropping down my weight now into the saddle, and my front line is getting taller. So you can also think about that sleep walk again. If reach for the sky is not doing it for you, or you get a little bit too far behind the vertical and you're here and you're going to press yourself up to vertical, you think about sleep walk. So sleep walk, reach for the sky. I'm getting a little collapse, I think, so I'm going to think toothpick and slinky. Okay, so now we're going to get to the head and the neck, because our extremities are going to show us what kind of tension we still have left in our bodies, because the head and the legs and the arms bouncing, it's not really about the head and the arms and the legs, it's about what you have in the middle of you. So if I've done a good job and I'm loose and I'm organized, then my head is the last piece to be addressed, and then out to my arms. So again, if you feel that you have tension in the back of your neck, you can start by checking and just doing some head rolls. So you can start looking down and then all the way up and then all the way around and all the way down, and really try to let gravity do the stretching in the back of your neck, and you do it both directions and see how that feels, and then all the way back down, so that your head ultimately needs to be balanced over the center of your spine. So one of the cues that I like to think about is that if my body is taking my head for a walk, okay? So if my body is taking my head for a walk, then I don't have an extra tension in my neck and my throat. And the buzzword that I'm going to think about for that is that if my body was a golf tee, and you know, it's a little stick and it's got that little flat platform, the little flat platform is going to be the top of my spine. So if I say golf tee, then I'm going to balance my head over my spine. So I'm going to think about golf tee to make myself relaxed. Because a lot of times you're going to see riders with a head jutted forward or a head off to the side. That's all tension in the center and in the back of the neck. So if I feel like my head and neck is forward here, then I'm definitely going to want to do some head rolls or take my head for a walk or golf tee, because I want to make sure that my head is sitting like the rest of us is stacked right over our skeleton, and that our shoulders and spine is carrying our head, not muscle tension. So you'll also be able to tell at that point of whether or not you have one ear closer to a shoulder than the other. So a lot of us are going to ride like this by accident, and you'll see actually a lot of teachers teaching with the head cocked off to the side. I'm not sure why we do that, but it does give us a little bit of tension and closure on one side. So I'm going to think of the level right across the brim of my hard hat so that my ears are level and parallel to the ground and relaxed over my shoulder. Okay, so level with my ears. The other piece for the head is, I'm sure that you've seen, or maybe you're a rider that likes to have the chin jutted out like this so that the head is actually in front of the spine. You're going to use that buzzword collar to think like you're going to push your head back to the back of the collar of your shirt so it is centered over your body. So if you feel like you've got a little bit of a rolled shoulder and your body is tipping and your head and neck is sort of trying to be your balancing ball, think collar and then head over the golf tee or golf tee. Alright, so there we've covered quite a bit of things about the old head and shoulder, except for the biggie. And the biggie for me, I can't tell you how much I have to remind myself and my students, is that we all really like to look and see what our beautiful horse is doing and look and see where the head and the neck is, and we all have to raise our eye level. We're all looking down and the focus is down. Now remember, the head is a significant part of your body weight. So when I'm riding around, I constantly tell myself the old buzzword ponytail. So when I'm looking down, my ponytail's tucked under my helmet right now, but I'm going to think ponytail. So that I really think about making sure all of my weight is directly over the center of my body. So I left the big one for last because this is such a common position, and we really want to show our elegance when we're on top of the horse, and it also opens your front line and gives your horse more encouragement to come forward. Alright, so now we're going to go to the arms. All the while, we're going to be thinking about keeping our vertical channel with our upper body, but we have to now get to the arms, which are a real source of stiffness for a lot of riders. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to think about doing an arm scan or a shakeout, where I'm going to just take a little time and really shake my arm out and let all the blood relax, let my muscles relax, let my bones be greased in the joints and everything moving. So I'm just going to do a little arm shake with both arms, and you'll be able to tell, and you have to be honest with yourself about where you feel tension, whether you feel tension in the back of your arm in your tricep, or maybe your forearm, or maybe your hand gets a cramp because you're squeezing the rein too hard. So you're going to do an arm shake so that when I have my contact and I'm riding and I make a check of myself to see whether or not I'm loose, I'm going to use the word noodle so that I think, okay, I don't want to be flopping all over, but if I feel like I've got tension in my forearm, my own personal tension comes here between my bicep and my forearm and my elbow joint, I'm going to think noodle, so that I really think that all of these muscles in my arms are part of the connection of my horse, remembering that what you have in your arm is what your horse feels in his mouth. So we really have to make sure that the arm muscles are really relaxed and fluid, and that they're a receiver of the contact and not a taker of the contact. Okay, so now when we get back to the buzzwords of the arms, I want to start at the shoulder, which we've already done some of the wings, and then we're going to drop down, we're going to go to the elbow. Okay, so the L of the elbow has to be bent, that the L of the elbow is pointed down to the ground. It shouldn't be open or stiff. So when I feel myself getting a little bit tight, I'm going to think L of my elbow. And the other part of that is that if your elbow is pointed to the inside of the circle or the outside of the circle, feel, then you don't have any flexibility or elasticity. You can sort of feel like this is sumo wrestler arm, so that the arm doesn't have any place to go. So I think of the word biceps, where I'm going to bring my biceps next to my rib cage. So I think biceps and L of my elbow together. So if I have that L of my elbow as a joint so that it can open and close, it's necessary for many things to come. Like, for example, I'm going to exaggerate moving my arms with Sam right now. Okay? A lot of times you're not going to see or you're not going to feel enough movement in your arms, and this is the buzzword that we talked about, jockey arms. So I'm really thinking about pushing my arms equally forward and back with Sam's movement. So I'm thinking jockey arms. Now if I have my arms out to the side and my biceps aren't closed or my elbow's not down, you can see how much it limits my arm from being elastic. Okay, so we've got the biceps, we've got the jockey arms, and we're going to talk about the lower part of your arm now. We're going to talk about the forearm and the hand. Okay, so when we talk about where the hand needs to be, the word I use for myself is work area. The work area being a box over the wither and just in front of the wither that your hand should always be in. So when we think about our hands can actually be in the work area and not be in the correct position. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, because we all do this, especially if you're doing some bending or flexing, is that if you have both of my hands are in the work area, but one of my hands is lower than the other. So if I see this, that I'm doing this, or if I see one of my students doing this, I'm going to remind them that the hands have to be a mirror image of each other, and that the hands need to feel like you're carrying a tray. If I were carrying a tray of really nice glasses, crystal glasses, I wouldn't want to tip it over to the side. That means my left hand would have to be lower. I wouldn't want to tip it to the other side. I wouldn't want to tip it away from me, and I wouldn't want to tip it towards me. So I just want to feel like I can carry that tray in a really balanced position. It also will help us make sure that we keep our thumbs in the right place. So we don't want to have flat, sort of playing the piano hands, and we don't want to have our thumbs sticking out to the outside. So if I'm carrying the tray, if I use that buzzword tray, it really covers almost everything for my arm, my lower hand. So the beauty about the tray is that in order to do the tray, your wrist has to be relaxed. So if we have a really stiff wrist, I'm going to overdo that a little bit right here, and you can see that everything sort of stops moving when I stiffen my wrist, then I'm not going to be able to follow the horse's movement. So the word that I'm going to use and the exercise that I'm going to do is bobble wrist. Okay, so I'm going to take my hand off for a second so you can see. I'm just going to, like, I'm whisking eggs or something, and I'm going to bobble my wrists so that I can always have the flexibility in my forearm and in my wrist, because you know, when we do a flexion, we have to be able to independently move the wrist and the fingers without the arm stiffening or going somewhere. So if I feel like maybe my horse is tight in the hand, or maybe I'm tight in the hand, I'm just going to think about the tension of my own wrist first before I blame the contact of the feeling in my contact on my horse. I'm going to check to make sure that my own wrist is nice and relaxed. Okay, so we've got the wrist and the hand. Now one of the big issues, and I'm not going to be trotting today because Sam's been just so patient for me walking all this time, but I am going to show you in the walk, is that many of the times I see the hands going up and down. My own hands can sometimes go up and down a little bit in the posting trot, and I'll just do it in the walk here, where my arms go up with my body, and you'll see this in the trot, of course, because you're posting up 6 or 8 inches, and if the elbow is not relaxed in the position next to your side, and you post and your bottom comes out of the saddle appropriate like 6 or 8 inches, and your elbow doesn't relax, and your hands are going to go up 6 or 8 inches. Okay, so the joint that's between the body and the hands is the elbow. So just need to make sure that my arms can stay relaxed. I'm going to press my hands down and forward as I post, as if I have that old time washing my clothes feeling. There's my buzzword for my opening and closing elbows. I push my hands down when I stand, and I relax when I sit. And you can practice this at the walk, and then same in the trot, so that way we just make sure that we have opening and closing of our elbows when we're doing our trot. And of course, when you're in sitting trot, we don't come out of the saddle 6 or 8 inches to post, so the elbow has to remain soft and elastic, and it has to bounce and it has to open and close, but it's less of amount than if you're posting. So I think that we've gotten through most of our buzzwords that you've seen and how I think about them when I am walking and organizing myself for my ride, especially if it's the first or second horse, or maybe I'm tired and it's the end of the day, or I'm on somebody new and I just want to let them walk around. Then I go through all of that. And you're not going to have to go through every single one of those and take a half an hour or 45 minutes walking around, but you'll get to know the ones that are important for your body and for your horse, and then you can really help yourself get through these exercises and make yourself a more elegant and more effective rider, so that you can own your own horse's position by owning your position. So I hope that this has helped, and I'm just going to come back and face the camera and say that it actually is quite fun, and when you get organized and you have a horse that is adapt to doing this, you can do this some of at the trot and some at the canter after you've been very, very successful and safe at doing everything at the walk. See you later.